The bus hissed to a stop, its tired engine groaning a final protest. Richard Evans, usually a man whose presence commanded immediate attention, felt only the icy sting of indifference. His expensive suit, now rumpled and stained, offered no shield. His hand, usually reaching for a sleek leather wallet, hovered uselessly over an empty pocket. The driver, a burly man with a patchy beard, grunted, "Well, you getting on or what?" The words, laced with contempt, were not a question, but a dismissal. Richard's jaw clenched, humiliation burning his cheek. Every other passenger averted their gaze, a silent collective agreement to ignore the man stripped bare. But then, a small hand, surprisingly steady, appeared beside his own. It held a crumpled wad of bills, smelling faintly of stale bread and metal. "I'll pay for him," a child's voice, small but firm, cut through the heavy silence. The driver's eyes, cold and calculating, flicked from Richard to the girl, a smirk twisting his lips. "Figures," he muttered. "You people stick together." His laugh was ugly, sharp. Richard looked down. A small black girl, barely 10, her dark curls pulled back into a tight bun, stood there, her old sneakers scuffed, her clothes worn to threads. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, met his, holding a wisdom that belied her years. And in that moment, for the first time in a long, long while, Richard Evans felt truly seen. Amara had known the scent of Mapleton's annual spring fair since before she could remember. The sugary sweetness of spun candy, the greasy promise of fried dough, the metallic tang of cheap thrill rides. But beneath the festive facade, she knew the town held another, more pungent smell. Willow Creek, as the locals called it, was where the flags flapped brightly, where families laughed and spent money like water. The Hollows, her home, was just across the bridge, a place of sagging houses, boarded windows, and the constant hum of survival. Every spring when the fair bloomed, Amara, barely 10 years old, would make the pilgrimage. Not for the rides, not for the games, but for the detritus of a good time. The empty soda bottles, the crumpled beer cans, the forgotten plastic cups that littered the ground beneath benches and beside food stalls. To them, it was trash. To her, it was a few coins, enough for bread, maybe a can of beans for her and her younger brother Leo, waiting back in their tiny shared room. Their mother, a ghost in their lives since she'd left 2 years ago, had taught Amara the brutal truth. Ain't no handouts, baby girl. You gotta make your own way. And don't you ever forget where you come from, or they'll make sure you do. No. Today, the air was thick with the excited chatter of children, the blare of carnival music, and the distant screams from the Ferris wheel. Amara moved through it all like a shadow, her faded gray trash bag, nearly half her size, dragging softly behind her. People shifted as she passed, a silent parting of the sea. A woman in a floral dress pulled her toddler closer, wrinkling her nose. A group of teenagers in varsity jackets snickered. "Look, Hollow's trash in town," one muttered, loud enough to be heard. Amara didn't flinch. She was used to it. The stares, the whispers, the thinly veiled disgust. She was here for the trash. The junk that, for them, was a fleeting moment of consumption, but for her, a sliver of hope. She'd been collecting since dawn, her small fingers aching, her back protesting the weight of the bag. The sun began its slow descent, painting the white-painted rooftops of Willow Creek in hues of orange and purple. The fair slowly unraveled, booths closing, music fading, crowds thinning. Amara wiped her brow, glancing at the almost full bag of recyclables. Not bad for a day's work. Enough maybe to buy some bread, and a little extra for Leo's cough syrup. She slipped through a narrow alley, its walls streaked with graffiti, and hurried toward the old bus stop at the edge of town, the last stop before the Hollows. The streetlights flickered on as she approached, casting long, distorted shadows. The cracked bench, the faded map, the worn sign that read the Hollows, last stop. A few tired faces were already waiting, shoppers with heavy bags, commuters with slumped shoulders. They all shared the same unspoken agreement: ignore the little black girl with the trash bag. let her blend into the shadows. Amara didn't mind. Shadows were safer than stairs. But that night, she wasn't the only one on the edge of belonging. Sitting at the far end of the bench was a man, older, maybe 50, white, dressed in what had once been a crisp, expensive suit. Now his shirt was rumpled and stained, his slacks dusty, his polished leather shoes scuffed, and his graying hair stuck to his forehead with sweat. He looked like he'd walked all day, maybe longer. His eyes, tired and lost, darted around the street like he wasn't sure where he was anymore. Richard Evans had spent a lifetime building an empire, a fortress of steel and glass, a legacy built on shrewd decisions and ruthless ambition. He was the CEO of Sterling Holdings, a name synonymous with power and influence in the city. He lived in a penthouse that kissed the clouds, drove cars that purred like lions, and dined in restaurants where reservations were whispered, not maddo. He had always believed in the inherent order of things, the natural hierarchy. Poverty was a problem for others to solve, a distant abstract concept, a statistic. He'd seen the news reports about the hollows, about the struggles, the crime, and had simply dismissed it as a consequence of poor choices, a world entirely separate from his own. That afternoon, a sudden, brutal turn of events had shattered his carefully constructed reality. He'd been in Willow Creek for a rare, discreet meeting, a potential acquisition that required his personal touch. Walking back to his chauffeured car after a successful negotiation, he'd taken a shortcut through what he thought was a quiet, affluent alley. Instead, he'd found himself face to face with two figures, masked and menacing. They were quick, efficient. His watch, his wallet, his phone, all gone in a blur of adrenaline and cold steel. The shock had left him reeling, disoriented. He'd stumbled out of the alley, his mind a jumble of anger and disbelief. His car, his driver, were nowhere in sight. He'd tried to hail a cab, but none would stop for a disheveled man with no visible means of payment. He'd walked and walked and walked, the unfamiliar streets blurring into a humiliating maze, until he found himself at the Willow Creek bus stop. His carefully curated world crumbled around him. The bus hissed around the corner, its headlights casting long shadows over the cracked sidewalk. The driver barely glanced at Richard as the doors creaked open. Richard stepped forward, his hand hovering near his pocket, a desperate, futile gesture. Empty. His jaw tightened. He could feel the eyes of the other passengers, not on him, but why through him. No one offered help. No one ever did for people like him when they were stripped of their armor. And for the first time in a long while, Amara wasn't invisible. She was the one who saw it. The desperation, the shame, the quiet plea hidden behind the man's silence. She reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out the crumpled bills she'd earned, wrinkled, torn, but enough. "I'll pay for him," she said, her voice small but steady. The driver raised an eyebrow, looked her up and down, and smirked. "Figures," he muttered. "You people stick together." His laugh was ugly, sharp. Amara's cheeks burned, but she held her ground. The bills trembled in her hand, but her stare didn't. And with that, two outcasts, one small, one grown, climbed aboard under the weight of a town's quiet hate. The old city bus rumbled down the cracked road like an exhausted animal, its engine coughing, metal joints groaning with every jolt and bump. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of old vinyl cigarette smoke clinging to the seat cushions, and something sour lingering from too many bodies packed in over the years. The yellowed overhead lights flickered weakly, casting a dull glow over the rows of faded seats and the worn floor stained with forgotten spills. Amara kept her head down as she made her way toward the back, her trash bag dragging behind her, rattling softly with the clink of empty bottles and cans. Richard followed quietly, his shoulders hunched, his steps slow and uncertain, like someone walking through a memory they didn't want to relive. The driver watched them in the mirror as they settled into their seats. His smirk still lingered, that same sharp edge of contempt curling the corners of his mouth. He didn't say another word, but he didn't have to. It was all there. The look, the shrug, the way he mashed the gas pedal a little too hard, as the bus jerked forward, tossing Amara slightly in her seat. The other passengers barely looked at them. A woman near the front clutched her shopping bags closer. A man in work boots and a ball cap pretended to sleep, but kept sneaking glances toward the back gate. No one said anything, but the message was clear as glass. You don't belong here. Neither of you. Stay quiet. Stay invisible. No. Amara pressed herself against the window, the cold glass grounding her. Outside, Willow Creek blurred past in streaks of neon signs, shuttered storefronts, and rows of old houses sagging under years of disrepair. Streetlights flickered overhead, their glow hazy in the thick night air. Her reflection stared back, small, dark eyes beneath curls pulled tight, the faint smudge of dirt across her cheekbone, lips pressed together in quiet defiance. 10 years old, and already she understood this world better than most grown-ups ever would. Richard sat across the aisle, his eyes fixed on the floor, hands resting awkwardly in his lapboard. His expensive shirt, now wrinkled and stained, looked utterly out of place here. His leather shoes were scuffed, one of the laces frayed at the ends. But it wasn't the clothes that gave him away. It was the way he carried himself, or at least used to. The broad shoulders slightly slumped now, the tight jaw, the way his eyes flicked toward the other passengers, calculating, uncertain. He wasn't from this side of life, not usually. But tonight he was as much a ghost as she was. For a while, neither of them spoke. The bus rattled over potholes, brakes screeching at every intersection. Amara counted the stops, her small fingers tightening around the strap of her trash bag each time the doors hissed open. More people got off. A few new ones got on, but no one ever sat near them. Finally, curiosity chipped away at her caution. She turned slightly in her seat, voice quiet but steady. You didn't have money, she stated. Not really a question, more like an observation hanging in the stale air. Richard looked up, surprised, his blue eyes meeting hers for the first time. There was something raw behind them, exhaustion, maybe shame, but not the hard, dismissive look she was used to from men like him. He hesitated before answering, his voice rough, as if it hadn't been used all day. No, I didn't. His lips pressed together for a moment before he added, almost to himself, not anymore. Amara tilted her head, studying him. You look like you did, she said bluntly, her eyes drifting over the stained shirt, the pricey watch still clinging to his wrist, scratched but intact. What happened? Somebody rob you? Richard gave a dry, humorless laugh, running a hand over his face. Something like that. His fingers trembled slightly just for a second before he shoved them into his pockets, hiding the shake. Guess you could say I wasn't paying attention. Got careless. Amara nodded, the ghost of understanding flickering across her face. Happens. They fell silent again as the bus rolled through the dark outskirts of Willow Creek, the street lights thinning, giving way to stretches of cracked pavement and shuttered gas stations. The hum of the engine, the occasional cough from the driver, the rattle of loose windows, it all blurred together in a monotonous soundtrack of forgotten spaces. Richard leaned his head back against the seat, eyes drifting to the ceiling, but his mind wasn't resting. His gaze flicked down to the girl across from him. The small, wiry frame curled protectively around the trash bag, the sharp eyes beneath thick lashes, the quiet but undeniable defiance etched into every inch of her. She couldn't have been more than 10. Yet she moved like someone twice that age. No fear, no trust, just constant calculation, the same way he'd learned to move today. Why'd you do it? He asked finally, breaking the quiet. His voice was low, cautious, like he wasn't sure he deserved to ask. Why'd you pay for me? Amara's eyes met his, steady and unflinching. She shrugged one small shoulder. Ain't nobody else gonna do it. Her tone wasn't bitter, just matter of fact. Like the sky was blue, people were cruel, and that's just how it was. Figured you know what that feels like. Richard let out a slow breath, eyes dropping to the floor. Yeah, I knew. For the first time in a long time, maybe more than he cared to admit, he truly understood. The bus shuddered to a stop. Another passenger got off. The street outside was nearly deserted now. Run-down houses, boarded windows, chain-link fences, leaning at awkward angles. They were getting close to the end of the line. "You from the Hollows?" he asked quietly. Though the answer was obvious, Amara nodded. "Born there. Guess I'll probably die there too." She said it so plainly, it made something twist sharp in his chest. "You don't sound too sure about that," he remarked, watching her. She paused, eyes narrowing just a touch. "Ain't sure about nothing except people don't like seeing folks like me around here." Her fingers tapped the trash bag softly. "But they sure like leaving enough garbage behind." The corner of Richard's mouth twitched. It wasn't exactly a smile, but it was close. He didn't say anything else. Neither did she. The bus lurched forward again, the last few stops ticking by like a slow countdown. Richard stared out the window, his reflection faint against the glass, the faded streetlights blurring past. His mind drifted, heavy with exhaustion, with questions, with a sting of humiliation still fresh in his chest. But through it all, that small voice, that defiant shrug, that handful of crumpled bills from a kid who had nothing, kept echoing louder than the engine ever could. And for the first time in years, Richard Evans didn't know where this ride was taking him. But he knew it wasn't over yet. The bus hissed as it pulled into the final stop, the brakes screeching with a tired groan, like even the machine was fed up with the weight it carried. Outside, the street stretched quiet and dark. Streetlights buzzed faintly, their flickering glow casting uneven patches of light onto cracked pavement. Faded signs pointed down narrow streets. Apartment buildings leaned tired against the night sky, their windows dim, their brick walls stained with age. The Hollows. The kind of place you only heard about on the news. Poverty, crime, everything those perfect little towns across the highway pretended didn't exist. Amara was already on her feet, her small hand gripping the strap of her overstuffed trash bag, sneakers squeaking faintly as she made her way down the aisle. The driver didn't look at her. The other passengers barely noticed. She was part of the scenery. Trash girl. The kid from the wrong side of everything. She hopped down the steps with the ease of someone used to disappearing into the night. Richard hesitated, his hand hovering over the back of the seat in front of him. The driver's voice cracked through the silence, sharp, impatient. "End of the line, man. Let's go." That same tone, the same simmering disrespect he'd spat at the girl, now aimed at him. It burrowed under Richard's skin like a splinter. But this time, he had no defense, no suit, no polished words, no corporate title hanging over him like armor. Tonight, stripped of all that, he was just another nobody being shuffled off to nowhere. He stepped off the bus, the doors hissing shut behind him like they couldn't wait to be rid of him. The air outside was thick with humidity and faint cigarette smoke, the kind that clung to your clothes and refused to leave. The buildings around him loomed, windows dark, paint peeling, the streets cracked and littered with forgotten scraps of life. His shoes clicked softly against the pavement as he looked around, disoriented, unmoored. Ahead, under the dim streetlight, Amara's small figure drifted down the sidewalk, her trash bag bouncing lightly behind her. For a moment, she seemed impossibly small against the heavy shadows of the street, yet her shoulders were squared, head high, step steady. No hesitation, no fear, just quiet resolve, like she'd walked these streets 100 nights before. Richard watched her for a moment longer than he meant to, something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. The weight of the day, the robbery, the bus ride, the humiliation, pressed down harder now, mixing with the gnawing unease creeping up his spine. He had always known in some abstract, distant way that places like this existed. But standing here, breathing it in, stripped of his status and shield, it wasn't distant anymore. It was suffocatingly real. He turned in the opposite direction, hands shoved deep in his pockets, shoes crunching over loose gravel as he started walking. The further he got from the bus stop, the more the streets changed. The cheap apartment buildings gave way to warehouses, then empty parking lots, then wide, empty intersections where even the streetlights flickered out entirely. He walked for blocks, his mind heavy, his chest hollow, until finally the world began to shift again. The sidewalks got cleaner. Storefronts appeared, first boarded up, then open, neon signs humming quietly. The buildings grew taller, glassier, more expensive. He passed late-night coffee shops where baristas packed up for closing, pedestrians in tailored coats, the faint hum of expensive cars sliding by. The forgotten edges of the city fell behind him, replaced by the polished heart of downtown. The heart he ruled. He reached the glass doors of his building. They slid open, and the concierge's eyes widened, surprise flashing across his face before he quickly masked it. Richard didn't stop, didn't explain. He rode the elevator to the top floor in silence, the hum of the machinery a soft, sterile contrast to the chaos of the streets he just left. His penthouse was exactly as he left it, immaculate, spacious, cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline like a photograph. The polished kitchen gleamed. The leather furniture sat untouched. It was everything he'd built. Everything he'd convinced himself mattered. And tonight, it felt utterly empty. Richard sank into the wide chair by the window, elbows on his knees, hands steepled under his chin. His eyes drifted over the glittering towers, the neat rows of streetlights, the distant hum of a city that kept moving with or without him. His reflection in the glass stared back. Creased shirt, dirt-stained slacks, tired eyes. It wasn't the lost wallet or the stolen phone that hollowed him out tonight. It wasn't even the smug bus driver or the indifferent stares. It was the way they all looked, eyed through him, ignored him, reduced him to nothing more than an inconvenience, a problem. Background noise. For the first time in years, Richard Evans knew what it felt like to not belong, to be unseen, unwanted. And yet, amid all that, there was her. Amara's face lingered in his mind. The guarded eyes, the sharp edges of her small frame, the quiet defiance wrapped in worn-out clothes. The way she'd stood there, pulling crumpled bills from her pocket, handing them over like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. No hesitation, no pity, just action. He closed his eyes, her words looping in his ears. Ain't nobody else going to do it. A 10-year-old, with less than nothing to her name. And still, when everyone else turned away, she'd stepped forward. Richard exhaled long and heavy, the weight of his pride, his status, his carefully curated life pressing against his ribs like stone. He opened his eyes again, the city lights glittering below, bright and blinding. But suddenly, for the first time, the polished skyline felt more like a cage than a crown. And for the first time he wondered what it would take to change that. The street outside the bottle return smelled like old oil and stale cigarettes. The faint buzz of neon signs fought against the pale morning light. Amara hoisted her bag of plastic bottles higher on her shoulder, her small frame hunched under its weight, sneakers scuffing the cracked sidewalk. The lazy air was heavy with that same familiar mix of exhaustion and quiet resignation that clung to every corner of the hollows. She barely noticed the sleek black sedan that rolled to a slow stop behind her. It wasn't until the door opened and the footsteps approached, steady, purposeful, unfamiliar for these streets, that she turned, eyes narrowing. Richard Evans stood there, clean, sharp, out of place in every possible way. His pressed navy coat, polished shoes, even the faint scent of expensive cologne. It all screamed of another world. But his eyes, they weren't polished. Not today. They carried something raw, something unsettled, like he hadn't slept since the last time they'd seen each other. Amara stiffened, her grip tightening on the bag. What are you doing here? Her voice was sharp, cautious, like a cornered cat, ready to run. Richard hesitated only a second before stepping closer, hands open, his voice steady but quiet. I wanted to see you again. His eyes searched hers, heavy with something that wasn't pity, wasn't charity, just truth. And I wanted to ask you something. Amara's jaw clenched. I ain't got nothing worth asking about. Richard's lips pressed together for a moment, the faintest crack of frustration breaking through before he softened again. You got more than you think. His gaze flicked to the bag of bottles, the frayed hem of her hoodie, the stubborn set of her shoulders. You got more than most adults I know. She bristled at that, eyes narrowing further. What? 'Cause I picked up your sorry butt last night when nobody else would. Her chin tilted defiantly. Don't mean you owe me nothing. I ain't stupid. Oh. Richard exhaled, a slow, measured breath. No, you're not. He took another careful step closer, his voice lowering. Which is why I'm going to be straight with you. I don't just owe you. I respect you. He paused, then added, quiet but steady. And I want to help. No more. Amara's laugh was small and sharp, like glass breaking underfoot. Help, Dada. She shook her head, curls bouncing slightly. Ain't nobody helping little black girls from the hollows. Not unless they want something. Her eyes flashed cold, too old for her face. Ain't nobody that good. Richard's expression faltered for the briefest second, the weight of her words settling hard in his chest. But he didn't back down. I don't want anything from you. His voice cracked slightly as he added, but I owe it to you to try and be better. Amara's arms crossed over her chest, chin lifting, her small frame still radiating defiance. You don't get it. Her voice dropped, bitter and low. There ain't no better for people like me. My mama told me that before she left. She said, don't trust no smiles. Don't trust no handouts. 'Cause this world don't love girls like me and folks like you. She motioned to him, to the polished coat, the clean shoes, the skin he wore like an unspoken shield. You don't care. You look right through us. Till you don't. Nancy. Her words sliced clean through the morning haze, the accusation hanging heavy between them. Richard's throat tightened. His hands dropped to his sides as a bitter swell of shame crawled under his skin. She wasn't wrong, not completely. He'd spent years doing exactly that, walking past, looking through, never seeing. And then without thinking, he stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. Amara stiffened instantly, muscles locking, her small fists curling against his chest, but Richard didn't flinch. His arms wrapped around her gently but firmly, the way a man who'd never known how to say the right thing chooses the only truth left in action. I'm sorry, he whispered, the words raw, rough, pressed into her tangled curls. I'm sorry for this world. I'm sorry for every time someone looked away. For every time I looked away. Amara's shoulders twitched, her fists pressing harder against him, like she wanted to shove him back, but didn't know how. The fight in her was still there, coiled tight. But beneath it, something cracked, just for a second. Richard's voice dropped lower, nearly breaking. You shouldn't have to think like that. Not at 10. Not ever. His hand rested lightly on her back, his breath steadied despite the tremor in his chest. I can't fix the whole world, kid, but I can start here. With you? Nah. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The street noise carried on, a car honking in the distance, the low hum of a motorcycle growling past. But within that small space, it was quiet, heavy, real. Finally, Amara shoved gently against his chest, just enough to break the contact, her face tilted up, eyes shining, sharp and guarded all at once. You really believe that? Her voice cracked faintly. One person can fix any of this? Richard's smile was faint, tired but real. No, Ian. He shook his head slowly. But maybe they can fix themselves. She stared at him for a moment longer, the walls inside her rattling, the years of warnings and hard lessons, clawing to stay in place. But something small, fragile and impossibly stubborn, flickered beneath the surface. She stepped back, arms crossed tight again, her expression unreadable. You talk nice, she muttered. But I ain't stupid. Richard nodded, the corner of his mouth twitching faintly. I'd expect nothing less. And as he stood there, watching this tiny, fierce child turn away, dragging her trash bag behind her like a badge of survival, Richard Evans knew the hardest part wasn't convincing her. It was convincing himself that maybe this time, he wouldn't look away. The grand ballroom glowed under soft golden light. Crystal chandeliers sparkled like frozen stars suspended above a sea of polished shoes and designer dresses. Rows of tables lined the room, the crisp white linens and delicate flower arrangements, a sharp contrast to the quiet heaviness that lingered beneath the surface. Waiters moved gracefully between chairs, the clink of silverware, the hum of conversation filling the space like background music in a world carefully curated to feel important. But tonight, the walls of privilege weren't as thick as they used to be. Richard Evans stood near the podium at the front of the room, his tailored suit impeccable, his silver hair brushed neatly back. The faint lines at the corners of his eyes were deeper now, but not with exhaustion, with clarity. The weight of boardrooms and business deals had settled into something sharper, heavier, more personal over the past year. He adjusted the microphone, the soft murmur of the crowd quieting as heads turned, cameras flicked on, all eyes settling on him. But for once the attention didn't inflate his ego. It grounded him. His gaze drifted across the room to the long table near the stage where they sat, dozens of them. Children, brown eyes, tight curls, small shoulders, draped in clothes that actually fit for once. Some nervous, some wide-eyed, some holding hands beneath the table. Survivors of streets that weren't made for them. And right there at the center sat Amara. She looked different now, but not in the way clothes or fresh haircuts change a person. The defiance was still there in her posture, in the stubborn set of her jaw, but it was layered now with something else. Confidence, a spark of safety, a future. Her hair was pulled back neatly, a simple blue dress hugging her small frame. But it wasn't the fabric or the polish that caught Richard's breath. It was the way she met his eyes without flinching, chin tilted slightly in challenge, like she still didn't entirely believe this world. But she wasn't afraid of it anymore, either. The applause faded as Richard leaned into the mic, his voice steady, but tinged with the rawness he hadn't fully shaken since that night at the bus stop a year ago. He began, his eyes never leaving her. I thought I understood success. Power, what it meant to make it. His lips curled faintly, almost bitter. But standing on top means nothing if you've convinced yourself you don't see what's happening down below. The room held its breath, the silence stretching wide. I was that man, Richard continued, voice lowering. I walked past the forgotten ones every day, told myself it wasn't my fight, believed comfort meant I was somehow separate, immune. His hands flexed lightly against the podium. The memory of that night still burned into his skin. Until a little girl with a trash bag full of bottles did what no amount of money or titles ever could. She saw me, and she helped me when I had nothing left. A ripple of quiet swept through the crowd as whispers circled. Some recognized the story from the news. The CEO stranded, robbed, humbled by a stranger. But none of them had ever heard the Agreeal version. Richard's gaze swept the room, landing on the rows of children again, their small faces watching, some wide-eyed, some cautious. We tell ourselves children are the ones who need saving. But maybe it's us who need saving from our own indifference. You will. He took a slow breath, the rawness of the next words curling tightly in his chest. This foundation, Angel's Hope, it's not just charity. It's a promise. A reckoning. A refusal to keep walking past kids like these, like Amara, and pretending they don't exist. At the mention of her name, all eyes shifted toward the table. Amara didn't shrink beneath the attention. Her eyes stayed locked on Richard, sharp, steady, a quiet challenge beneath the surface, as if to say, you better mean every word. Richard smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth twitching with something warmer. Pride, and maybe redemption. The applause rose, steady, sincere, rippling through the room like a small wave of overdue acknowledgement. Richard stepped back, shoulders settling, but his eyes never left Amara. Later, after handshakes and staged photographs, after donors sipped their wine and congratulated each other for their generosity, Richard found her standing near the balcony, away from the noise. The city stretched behind her in glittering lines of light, but her eyes were on him before he even spoke. "You didn't run this time," he remarked softly, hands sliding into his pockets. Amara shrugged, that familiar, unbothered smirk tugging at her mouth. "Hard to run in new shoes." She tilted her foot, the shiny black flats catching the light. "Besides, I'd pancakes to finish." Richard chuckled quietly, the memory of their first breakfast flickering behind his eyes. He sobered as he added, voice lowering, all of this, it doesn't fix everything. You were right. The world's still what it is." "No, Ture." Amara's eyes softened, a quiet understanding slipping through the cracks of old defenses. Yeah. Her voice was low, almost tired for someone so young. "But it's a start." They stood there for a long moment, the city humming below, the weight of the ballroom pressing behind them. And for the first time, it didn't feel impossible. It felt earned. And as the night unfolded, as speeches gave way to music and cautious hope flickered across worn faces, Richard Evans understood something he never thought he would. Angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they carry trash bags, and sometimes they save you long before you ever think to save them.